So, welcome. So on behalf of Seattle AWIS, I would like to welcome you to our April chapter program. My name is Rita Weeks. I am on the Seattle AWIS board and I'm also the current treasurer. So our Seattle AWIS monthly programs are open to the public, men and women, members and non-members, because we really believe in the aspect of bringing people together to get acquainted and to share ideas. So I want to welcome not only the people that are here in person, but we also have people joining us by Zoom. So one of the things that we think is important is to get to know what are some of the interests of our audience. So I'm going to ask a few questions and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and you can look around and see who else is answering. And for those of you on Zoom, if you're in gallery view, you should be able to see hands raised in answer to these questions. And this is also going to help our speaker know a little bit more about the audience that she's going to be speaking to. So my first question is, how many of you are AWIS members? Some. And for the rest of you, I invite you to join us. And then we'd like to know a little bit about the area in which you work or in which you have an interest. So how many of you are or work in the biological field? Okay. How many of you in computer technology? Okay, quite a few. And how many in environment or oceanography areas? Okay, great. All right, so then my next question, how many of you have visited Seattle Aquarium Ocean Pavilion? Excellent. Well, I think after tonight's talk, you're going to be inspired to revisit if you've already, even if you've already been there once. Okay, and finally, I have a fun little quiz for you. Uh-oh, there we are. The question is, what is a bioball? And you have 4 potential answers. 1, it's a souvenir given to children that visit the Ocean Pavilion. Second choice, balls with bacteria that process animal waste in water. Third choice, balls used by the yoga class that meets on the Ocean Pavilion walk and overlook. Or your fourth choice is an AI-directed device that can interact with aquatic animals. Okay, so I am not going to ask you to show me your answer, but this is what I hope you answered. The bioballs are really spheres with lots of surface area so that beneficial bacteria have a place to grow. These bacteria then are crucial for breaking down the ammonia that's part of animal waste. And so these bacteria then can convert that ammonia to less toxic forms. But even more interesting, you can virtually adopt a bioball for $10, and then you can join the bioballer community. So if you're interested, go to the Seattle Aquarium website. Okay, so tonight we're going to learn a whole lot more interesting facts about Seattle Aquarium, and we're particularly interested, I think all of us are here, not only in the aquarium, but in their conservation projects, which we're going to hear about from our speaker. So I hope you had a chance to meet some people before the program started. There will be more time for chatting among yourselves and with our speaker at the end of the program. So my goal is that before you leave this evening, you will have introduced yourself to someone new and that you will find that person that has either similar interests based on your survey or someone who has completely different interests. So at this time, I want to introduce Dr. Tracy Popowicz. She is the Seattle AWIS chapter president, and she's going to tell you a little bit about AWIS.
Thank you, Rita. I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces and some new faces. I would go to yoga classes at the Pavilion if they were offered. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the AWIS. So since 1971, AWIS has been a resource network and voice for women in science, technology, engineering, and math. And our impact on the success of women in STEM is nationwide. We have 30 nationwide local chapters. So you're here at the Seattle chapter. And the Seattle chapter has been supporting Seattle Women in STEM since 1985. So our vision is a world where Seattle women of all ages are actively supported in STEM hobbies, studies, and careers. We believe the entire Seattle community will benefit when women are positively represented, compensated, and recognized for their achievements in STEM pursuits. So our mission is to create a broad interdisciplinary welcoming environment to advance the careers of women in science and technology, and to promote the participation of girls in STEM also. So we do that in a number of different ways. We do that at public events like this one that you're attending this evening. And as you probably know, these events are hybrid and free, and as Rita said, welcome to everyone. We have what's called a GEMS program, which is for girls in engineering, math, and science. And it's a program for 7th and 8th grade girls to cultivate their interest in STEM fields. We also have a mentoring program that's for adult women. So groups of 5 to 7 women meet monthly to support one another. And they foster and support one another in exploring different topics with an experienced mentor. And then we give out a number of scholarships. So in amounts of $1,000 and more are given out to women who are majoring in STEM fields or who will be juniors or seniors at a four-year college or university in the state of Washington. And then we have a banquet yearly at which we give out awards. So outstanding women in STEM are recognized for their science, innovation, leadership, and education achievements. So this year, our banquet is going to be on Tuesday, June 17th. And the awards that Seattle AWIS will be giving this year will be 3 awards. For the Science, Technology, Advancement, and Leadership Award, that will go to Dr. Sarah Keller. For Early Career Achievement in STEM, Dr. Alyssa Lind will receive that award. And for Excellence in STEM Education and Outreach, Dr. Agnieszka Miguel. So again, that's Tuesday, June 17th at 6:30 to 9:30. It'll be at the Center for Early Horticulture. And we'd love to have new table sponsors. So you could get increased visibility in the community and show support for women in STEM by offering complimentary banquet seats. And there are 4 sponsorship levels that are available. The individual ticket sales opened this week, so you can go to the Seattle AWIS website and find the ticket sales there. So come join us. Seattle AWIS is a volunteer and donation-run organization, and we would be pleased to have you as part of our community. So become a member or volunteer or make a donation and fund a scholarship. Thank you.
So our program this evening features Alyssa Lind. She is a marine science interpretive diver for Seattle Aquarium. She has been an educator, a researcher, and a diver with the aquarium for 8 years. She has worked on a wide variety of research and conservation projects all over the world. But instead of me telling you about her education and career path, I'm going to let Alyssa tell you. It'll be a lot more interesting. But I would like you to take note of questions that you have while she's speaking. At the end of her talk, you will be invited to ask questions, and people on Zoom, we will also take your questions from Zoom chat. Okay, so Alyssa?
Right. Hello. So yeah, my name is Alyssa Lind, and I'm excited to do a little bit of storytelling. It's a big part of my job at the aquarium, and I quickly realized that I couldn't tell you all of my stories. There's a lot to say. There's a lot of incredible work that happens in the aquarium, but I'm excited to tell you some of my favorite stories about it. And yeah, first a little bit about me and my background. I was really lucky in high school. My high school had a marine ecology class. Which is not the case for a lot of people, but I had a really incredible teacher who made me realize that I could get paid to hang out on a boat and go scuba diving, and that sounded really good to me. So I went to UC Santa Barbara for my undergrad, and I got certified my freshman year immediately in scuba. And I ended up kind of condensing all of my classes in college into 3 days a week so that I could take the other 2 days and go out on the research boat and go scuba diving. UC Santa Barbara is literally right on the beach. We would drive about 5 minutes. I was trained to operate this massive crane and lower the boat into the water, hop into it, and then we would take off all over in Southern California and do some incredible work as a part of the long-term ecological research network. So doing long-term subtitle studies, looking at how species are changing over time. And that is when I fell in love with kelp forests. So this is a video from Santa Barbara Island, which is one of the Channel Islands. And there's something about kelp forests that I love. They have this vertical structure, and it really is an underwater forest. Coral reefs are beautiful, but unpopular opinion, I am a cold water girl, and kelp forests are just incredible. So I was able to work on different research projects kind of all over the world, from Australia to Moorea in French Polynesia, which is where that coral reef picture is taken. While I was at UCSB, I also worked with swell sharks. So there's me with a little baby swell shark in that center picture there. And ultimately, after working in Moorea, I still decided that it was kelp forests for me. So I headed to Alaska, and that's where I went to grad school, was the University of Alaska. And it was a big change from California, where I had done a lot of my other kelp forest work, but it was beautiful. And it's also where I met my very first giant Pacific octopus. So that's the top picture there. That's my neoprene, my wetsuit glove, gently trying to convince them to not be on my boat's anchor. I was diving and I couldn't find my anchor to find my way back to the boat, and I realized it was because there was a giant Pacific octopus, or a GPO as we like to call them affectionately, who was camouflaged in a bed of kelp, just sitting right on top of the anchor. I think it was just like a toy for them, a little bit of enrichment. It was enrichment for me trying to arm wrestle them and get them to leave. But yeah, that was my first interaction with an octopus, and they're also one of my favorites. Right below the octopus is the first wolf eel that I ever saw. And I'm going to talk more about wolf eels later because they're my absolute favorite fish in the world. But seeing that wolf eel in Alaska, they look like a tropical fish. That is a juvenile wolf eel, and they're bright orange. They have purplish blue polka dots, and they do not blend in with the other drab critters that you see in Alaska. So I did a lot of other work other than just hanging out with cool animals. And again, I was focusing on kelp. So I did a couple chapters in my thesis. One of them was focused on baby kelp, and one was focused on adult kelps and really the ecosystem at large, the associated macroalgal community, the invertebrates. And that was a multi-decadal data set that I inherited and got to collect the last 2 years of data for, and then also just make, sense of the first 20 years of the data set. But one of the parts that I really loved for this project was all of the diving that I got to do, not only for that long-term data set, but also to collect my little baby kelps. So if you're unfamiliar with kelp reproduction, which I'm gonna assume most people are, it is very similar to ferns. They have an alternation of generations and they release spores. Some kelps, like that bull kelp there with that red circle, release their spores from the surface. So those little patches are sori, just the same as the spots on the underside of fern leaves. And kelp drop them, they release their little spores into the water, and the spores sit there throughout the winter, just waiting for the first little bit of warmth and sunshine for the next generation to start growing up. So I collected sori. Even better are the kelps that release the sori from the base of the kelp, because that meant I got to go dive in to collect their sori. And then those microscope images are my little baby kelp that I measured the settlement rate and the gametophyte growth. So that's that little baby kelp. It's a little bit, I don't know if I can move this. I hate to, oh, there we go. Great. So that is my little individual gametophyte of kelp, and that's the original germ tube growing off of the spore right there. So I was measuring their growth rates under different temperature and salinity treatments to see how kelps fared under projected climate change. The good news is kelps are very resilient. So, and as you would expect, kelps with bigger ranges are even more resilient. They're already experiencing that wide range. But after grad school, there we go. After grad school was the dreaded job search. So I published my thesis, and then I had to find my next thing. I came here to Seattle because I have a lot of family in the area, and there's a lot of marine science happening in the area. And while I was job searching, I found out that you can volunteer dive at the aquarium. So that's what I started doing to keep myself sane while I was searching for jobs. And lo and behold, 2 months later, a position opened up. So that was 8 years ago. Now they can't get rid of me. And so that brings me to the Seattle Aquarium. So our mission at the Seattle Aquarium is inspiring conservation of our marine environment. And it is something that is incorporated to our daily work. We are doing the science, but we're also communicating the science. And a big part of my job is letting people know how many different conservation and research projects are happening. And every time you go to the aquarium, you're supporting them, and a lot of people don't even know it. So I wanted to share a few of my favorite research and conservation projects that fall under 3 kind of broad umbrellas. So climate resilience, sustainable seas, and clean waters are the overarching points that we are fitting all of our projects into. Those are kind of like our guiding lights when we're deciding what we want to do. So the first conservation project that I want to talk a bit about is our sea turtle rehab. We are one of 2 different rehab facilities for sea turtles in the entire Pacific Northwest. We used to be the only one, now there's also SR3 in West Seattle, and so we work closely together anytime that there is a sea turtle, because I don't know if people are aware, but they are not native to this part of the world. They should not be in our local waters. But what happens is it's typically olive ridley and green sea turtles, and they should be like in Mexico. They should be in the South Pacific, and they get caught in cold water currents, and they bring them north, and they experience cold shock, and their whole body shuts down. And at that point, their only hope is that they drift into shore. And so usually there are several turtles that drift into shore along the Washington coastline. And then, as you might know, there's not a lot of people around large strips of the Washington coastline. So then it's, will they be found? Will someone find them? So a lot of times it is tribal groups that are finding them because they're on remote beaches. And so then we can all work together. A lot of times we are using like tribal planes to transport them over here and get them into a water bath where we're slowly bringing back up their temperature. And this takes months. It's usually around 8 to 10 months of slowly bringing them back to life because they're not in a good state by the time that they come to us. Then we fly them back down to, these are very lucky turtles. We fly them back down to San Diego. We attach a tracker to them and send them off back down into Mexico, and we can track them and make sure that they're okay. So this is work that that happens a few times a year, and yeah, when we have them, they stay for quite a while. And now we can not only work with them at the aquarium, but we have an offsite animal care center where we work with them as well. So we also have some species recovery programs, and over here on your left is Pinto abalone, or Ch'ek, which is the Lishit seed name for pintos. So Lishit seed is the language of the Coast Salish people that have stewarded these lands since time immemorial and stewarded the populations of pintos. And so we work closely with them and with other tribal groups. And for this project, also the Puget Sound Restoration Fund and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So it really takes an army. There's a lot of folks looking out for these little snails. So if you're not familiar with abalone, they are adorable little snails, and they play a really important role in kelp forest ecosystems. So they are, of course, a part of the food chain, but they are also playing a role in basically grazing the kelp and decreasing competition between kelps so that we get greater diversity. And with greater diversity, there's greater resilience in the face of change, in the face of disaster, and other upset. So not having pintos is a real blow to the whole kelp forest community. They were overfished. And even when they weren't supposed to be fished, they were poached. So they are completely wiped out. They're also known as the northern abalone, which there are other species of abalone down in California, but the pintos are the only ones we have up here. So they're now an endangered species, and they're also broadcast spawners. So what that means is they release their eggs and sperm into the water. It's also known as the spray and pray technique, and hope that they meet up, hope that they make a little snail baby. But they are so sparse now that there is no hope that their eggs and sperm will meet up in the water. So we are raising them and we are releasing them back out. So here's that animal care facility, animal care center, which housed all of the animals that are now in the Ocean Pavilion building, which we'll talk about in a bit. But now this is space that is freed up to work on all of these conservation projects. So we can have our turtles there when we have them. We can raise more abalone there, and this is what that abalone facility looks like. They're really cute, they're really tiny. We load them into PVC pipes and we go diving out to 4 undisclosed locations, which it's sad that they have to be undisclosed, but again, they were poached, so they're top secret. And we leave the PVC out for a while to let the little snails crawl out after we dive down and deposit them, and then we go back and get the PVC pipe later. And this has only been happening for a few years. But there's a lot of little pintos that have headed back out into the sound. And that's going to give them the jump start that they need to then be able to do that broadcast spawning. Now we have another species recovery project, which if you've been to the Ocean Pavilion, you've probably heard about. I'm repping my Reshark shirt today. Reshark is exactly what it sounds like. It is quite literally resharking our oceans. Because sharks have been overfished, they have been destroyed because of fear and misunderstanding. There's habitat degradation, there is overfishing in general and loss of their prey. So there is a lot of work that needs to happen to help out our shark friends, but they're actually the second most endangered group of animals after amphibians. So we were founding members of the Reshark program. And again, it's not us, it takes an army. There are over 90 partners around the globe that are, NGOs and other zoos and aquariums, tribal groups, all working together hand in hand to raise little sharks and release them back to the wild. And the pilot species for this project is the Indo-Pacific leopard shark. We have 2 of them under our care right now. So you can meet Kuda at the Ocean Pavilion, and his girlfriend will be there soon. They're still too young to have any babies, but many other pups have already been released to the wild. And that's Nesha, who manages the Reshark lab, essentially, in Raja Ampat in Indonesia. And so the local community is highly invested in this. They're releasing them into their marine protected area, where a lot of other sharks are thriving. But again, just like the abalone, those Indo-Pacific leopard sharks needed a little bit of a jump start. Now they are just the pilot species for this. So we also have our bowmouth guitarfish. And she has a really incredible story. Her mom was caught by a fishing boat in Taiwan, and they didn't know that she was pregnant. And bowmouth guitarfish give live birth. So, you know, when we're talking about CUDA, they lay eggs. It's much easier to transport eggs around the world. But bowmouth guitarfish have 18-inch babies. And her mom gave birth to 9 pups. They all came to us, to the Animal Care Center. And since then, we have our one bowmouth guitarfish. Rhina is her name, which is her genus. But her siblings have been flown all over. So they're now in Orlando, Cincinnati, Chicago, Atlanta. I got to visit her sibling in Orlando. I was like, I know your sister. And when they get older, they were rescued under the promise that their pups would return to protected waters. So again, critically endangered species. This is her at the Animal Care Center, enjoying lobster, which is her favorite food. She's very fancy. In addition to our species recovery work, we also have a ton of field work that we work on. And it's probably no surprise that my favorite field work involves me being under the water. We do a lot of work with rockfish, which there are many threatened and endangered rockfish in our local waters. And then we also do lots of kelp forest surveys as well. These are pictures from our recent surveys in the San Juan Islands this last December. And you can see, if you've ever seen pictures of scientific divers before, it's like you're like a Christmas tree. You have everything attached to you. We have our transite tapes, our data sheets, and cameras and all kinds of things attached to us. And this work in particular was looking at our ROV, which I've got some pictures there of the ROV at the surface, and kind of the ROV's point of view, because we put our ROV in the water, we go diving at the same time, and then it's like man versus machine. And we're doing a lot of work to figure out what the ROV is seeing versus what divers are seeing. There are pros and cons to both. The ROV can see a lot in a very short amount of time. And our ROV also is putting that footage through AI. So we have AI, we have volunteers that are AI teachers that are teaching them, what species of urchin, what species of anemone, what species of kelp, and all of that can crank out a lot of information really quickly. That being said, if we go back to these pictures of myself and my coworker Kim and I can peek between the rocks and we can see the young of the year rockfish, and we can see all kinds of things that ROV can't see. So again, there are pros and cons to both, and a lot of the work we're doing right now is just figuring out exactly what the data set looks like, depending on if I do it or if our little ROV does it. And also it's kind of fun because the ROV will just creep up on us, so you can actually see me on the screen there. They're like watching me from the boat. They've sent the ROV, and they're very quiet underwater also, so they really can creep right up on you. On the far side is some of our other field work, which is above the sea, but is also very fun. And it has to do with our sea otters. So I do have a little video that I'm going to play. We head out to the outer coast every single month, and we are doing a sea otter foraging study. So you'll see us with binoculars trying to find the sea otters. We've got some high-powered scopes once we do find them to zoom in on them so that we can see what they're eating. And you'll see that we have clipboards, we have like little timers with us, because we are furiously recording what they're eating, how big their prey is in relation to their paw size, and how long they're spending on each dive, so that we can get a really good idea of essentially like their energy budget and how much effort they are putting into foraging, what kinds of prey they're getting based on the location, so that we can better understand the pressures on the population of sea otters. We also do an annual census of sea otters. So we have about 3,000 northern sea otters on the outer coast of Washington. And we just want to make sure that they're getting plenty of food and a good variety of food. So that foraging work is really fun. And I will say last year, there were a ton of little baby otters as well. So that's a really, really good sign for a population that historically was completely wiped out due to the fur trade. And just a few dozen sea otters were brought down from Alaska to repopulate the state. But it's not always field work. So as much as I love diving and hiking along the coast and staring at cute little sea otters, there's a lot of lab work too, which I also love. Most of the lab work that I'm involved with at the aquarium has to do with our microplastics research. So that's what the first two pictures here are. You can see the two samples in the middle are just a month apart. We're pulling in seawater and looking for microplastics from below the surface. This water is coming from the intake pipes to the aquarium, which is an open system. So it's coming from about 30 feet, give or take, depending on the tide, from below the surface, which is the only project of its kind like that. Most people are looking at beaches or at the surface of the seawater, but that's subtidal. We are the only ones doing it around here. And it's really important to know what's happening at depth. But it's also really challenging when there's a plankton bloom. So that's what you're seeing in those samples right there. That is just a month apart. And we get incredible plankton blooms around here. And so getting through all of that biological material to the plastics can be a real challenge. But mostly what we find are fibers. So fibers from people's clothes. So one of my biggest tips and something that I've tried to incorporate into my own life is avoiding acrylic and polyester and all of those man-made fibers and opting for natural fibers like cotton and wool. It's something that people don't really think about. You might think about like your reusable water bottle, which is awesome. But also next time I'm like at the store, I drive everyone crazy. So I'm like looking at the tags, trying to make sure that everything is natural fibers. And shopping secondhand is a great way to do it as well if you do need something that is acrylic, at least buy it secondhand. But yeah, they're always shedding fibers, and that is the number one thing we see in our samples. When COVID happened, there was a dramatic drop-off because the hotels weren't doing their laundry and shedding all of those microplastics on the waterfront. There wasn't all the foot traffic with everyone shedding all of those microplastics. So yeah, and then the picture on the far side is the other main thing that I have done in the lab is endocrinology work, and that is usually with fecal samples, but I thought that I would show y'all a feather instead of some sea otter poop. But endocrinology work is really important, checking up on the hormones of the animals. Surprise, surprise, at the aquarium, our animals are very not stressed, but it's a great baseline when we're comparing them to wild samples. So, yeah. And the last thing that I'll say just about the research and conservation is just that I feel like I've said it again and again, but we work with a lot of different groups. It is a group effort, and we share all of our data. So if you're interested in taking a peek at more of our data, the GitHub page is right there. It's also on our website if you want to check that out. But yeah, we love to collaborate. We want it to be a community effort. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I've been talking about all the cool research and conservation, which I love, but a huge part of my job is science communication because there's no point in doing science in a vacuum. We have to share it with everyone and we have to communicate it because otherwise what's the point? So these are a few kind of guiding principles when we are doing marine science interpretation at the aquarium. We meet people where they are. So we don't just, at the aquarium, we have signage, but we are big on people. And if you've been to the aquarium, you've probably noticed it, that there are staff and volunteers all over the place. Because we want to have a conversation with you, and sometimes you're talking to someone who's like a salmon researcher, and so like I also want to learn from you, and meet them where they are, and not just start talking at them. We're also big on developing empathy for the ocean. I work with a lot of faceless animals, and so empathy is a big one. The barnacle is like the poster child for empathy. And so I love telling the story of the barnacle. When they're born, they have 3 eyes. They shed 2 of them and one of their molts partway through their development. But little barnacles still have 1 eye. They can see your shadow coming, and they glue their head to the rock. They eat with their toes their whole life. And so, just understanding more about these animals and getting people to really connect with them. Even though they don't have faces, they are still animals, just like you and I. We encourage meeting making and community building. We've had a lot of community days events. We just welcomed our Muslim community for Idol Theater just a couple weeks ago. And so we, give free tickets and like get people through our doors if there are barriers. We want them to build a connection with the ocean no matter where they're from. If you like to breathe, guess what? You like the ocean, because over half of our oxygen comes from algae in the ocean. If you live in the mountains along a river, guess who fertilized your forest trees? It was the salmon, bringing that nutrients back from the ocean. They are like little vitamins, little packets of fertilizer that return home every year and feed our inland forests. And then this one is easy: inspire wonder and curiosity, which I think anyone who comes through our doors is going to be inspired, I hope. So for marine science interpretation, a lot of my work is doing like the mammal feeding shows, the enrichment presentation. So I do the octopus enrichment, the otter feeding. I wanted to share a few photos from a special event that we do every year, which is really near and dear to my heart. It is our octopus weekend event, which if you haven't been to, it's one of my favorites. I am biased because I get to design it and come up with all the activities and everything. But we do a massive octopus parachute game, which is very nostalgic if you ever played with one of those giant parachutes in elementary school. Of course, there's like science sprinkled in the whole way. And there's a lot of perspective taking. The kids get to, become the octopus. And then also we get to do a massive squid dissection. We do a lot of formal interpretation where we are doing these larger scale talks, but also a lot of informal interp and just hanging out at carts or hanging out with props and chatting with people throughout the aquarium. Some of my favorite marine science interpretation that I do is responding to like letters that people send in, or kids that visited the aquarium, or requests. So on the right side is just a short little article that I got to be the Ask a Zookeeper for the Week Junior magazine. And they sent me like 4 or 5 questions about jellyfish evolution and fish eyeballs and how do crabs breathe. So that was really fun. But I think one of my favorite things was there was a kid that wrote in a letter asking if ducks can get brain freezes, and also asking if octopus arms can fall asleep. And so this was part of the response, this drawing here, which was drawn by my husband, who works in neuroscience. And so we got to put our marine science and neuroscience brains together to answer the question, do octopus arms fall asleep? Which the answer is potentially yes. So they have all of the same machinery, essentially, that we do. And when your arm falls asleep or your leg falls asleep, it's your peripheral nerve that's getting kinked, essentially, and pressed again. So you can kind of think of it like kinking a hose, except instead of water, we're cutting off ions. And octopus do have the same peripheral nerve, but it is a lot shorter. So you can see in Shane's beautiful drawing that peripheral nerve is a lot shorter, so the odds of it getting kinked are lower. Octopus also don't have bones, so there's not as many hard things maybe right around it to result in the kinking of the peripheral nerve. But yeah, maybe octopus arms can fall asleep. So anyway, getting really creative with science and getting to respond to, every day I'm at the aquarium, I learn something. And a lot of it comes from people's questions the ocean is a big place, so I definitely don't know everything, and I get to look up and learn things all the time. Speaking of creativity and science communication, I get to create a lot of the signage around the aquarium. And some of my favorites are featured here. There is a board game where you can become a northern fur seal. There's also a game where you can become a coral polyp puppet. And so that's what that is. That's my coral polyp puppet. Corals are cousins to anemones and jellyfish. And so it's essentially a condo with all of these little tiny polyps, these little tiny creatures that live together, and they have a symbiotic algae in their skin called zooxanthellae. And so that's what my little green pom-poms are, the zooxanthellae. The pink is a little coral animal, and the cup is their little calcium carbonate skeleton, their little home. So kids can put on these little coral polyp puppets, and then they spin the wheel and they see what happens to them in their life as a coral polyp puppet, and they gain and lose their little zooxanthellae. So it's a great little empathy game where they get to become the coral animal, they see what happens to them, and then there are like tangible things that they can do to make the life better for an actual little coral polyp animal out there. So, and then just the signage around the aquarium. I also get to write and design. So one of the things I love about my job is just that every day is different, and I get to have my hands in a lot of different projects, which I think a lot of times when you get further on in science, you get more and more pigeonholed in one thing. And so I never thought I would work for an aquarium, but I do really appreciate the variety of projects, the variety of species that I get to work on. I love it. But I also love diving. So I do want to talk a little bit about exhibit diving as well, which is a really big part of my job. In addition to the field diving for all those research projects, we do marine science interpretation underwater. So the picture on the top there, that yellow mask, is a full face mask. And if we have any, do we have any divers in the audience? Okay. So if you are familiar with scuba diving, usually you have a regulator piece with a mouthpiece on it that you have to bite down on to be able to breathe underwater. But with a full face mask, you don't have to bite down on anything. Your mouth is free. You can actually breathe through your nose, which is such a luxury. And there's a little microphone on the inside. And the most important thing for me is that I have to remember that people can hear me because I talk to the fish. And so now there's a little microphone in my face. So we get to do presentations underwater. We're of course in there to do cleaning, to check up on the health of all of the animals, and to do feedings as well. And I do have my favorites. On the top is the rock greenling, who is a beautiful little fish. And that species doesn't have a swim bladder, which is the floaty, balloon-like organ that other fish have to hover up in the water column. If you've ever looked at a fish and you're like, how are you just hovering in position? It's the swim bladder, it's that internal balloon. But some species don't need it, they're adapted to hang out down on the seafloor. And the rock greenling is one of those species, but sometimes he wants to take to the sky. And so he often will sit on my shoulder and just hang out with me, which is great. And the other fish that don't have a swim bladder are the wolf eels. And on the far side are two of the wolf eels that I'm feeding, and they also will hang out with me. So wolf eels not only don't have a swim bladder, so they like to hitch a ride with you, you're essentially a fish taxi, but they also have a much thicker skin than other fish. Most fish have a really delicate skin with this thin layer of mucus that's a part of their immune system. And so you don't want to touch them unless you really need to. But with wolf eels, their scales are embedded in their skin, and they actually like to be scratched and scratched like little puppy dogs. So it's not hard to understand why they're a diver favorite. It also, I think, is really helpful for a lot of people to see fish with personalities. Fish don't they're not given enough credit. People don't think fish are very smart. People don't think that fish have personality. They do. And there's a lot of fish drama also. They have a lot going on. And so that's part of our job too, is to get people, again, to connect with them. Which I think is easier to do when I have a wolffish that looks like a feathered boa that's just hanging out with me. This is my beautiful rock grayling friend who likes to just sit on my shoulder and hang out with me. When we are inside of the habitat, these are some of the views that we get in there. And we get to see all these little baby animals. I mentioned before that this is an open system. And so we get all of this little plankton. Almost all the animals at the aquarium start out their lives as plankton. Plankton comes from the Greek word for drifter or wanderer. So anyone that is just along for the ride in the ocean is plankton. And a lot of that is just baby animals. So some plankton stay plankton their whole life, but a lot of them are baby animals that come in through our pipes and set up camp, and that's why the rocks in the old aquarium buildings, every inch of them is covered with life. It is some seriously prime real estate. That little sea star in the top corner, I know there's nothing for scale, but you have to take my word for it, they're the size of a dime. And that is one of my favorite things, is to find all these little baby sea stars. There's a little sea slug next to them, an opalescent nudibranch. They love to come in through the system as well. And vice versa, when our animals are reproducing, even endangered or threatened species like many of the rockfish, their babies go back out to the wild. They contribute to the wild population. And in the bottom corner there, those are some snail eggs from a hairy triton snail. And when they hatch out, they look like little butterflies, little microscopic butterflies, and they can head right back out to the wild as well. There's also a lot of other fun stuff that we do while we're diving at the aquarium. So I have to give a quick shout out to my favorite activity of the year, which is underwater pumpkin carving. And I am undefeated, not to jinx it. But it is a competition, and underwater pumpkin carving is a total blast if you feel like coming down around Halloween. We did an Animal Crossing collaboration, so that's why I have Tom Nook on that pumpkin, if you're familiar. But otherwise, I usually like to do a lot of puns. Down here in the corner, I've got my ghost shrimp. If you're familiar, there's a shrimp called a ghost shrimp. And my werewolf eel howling at the moon is what's happening here. It's also very important that we can do acrobatics, blow bubble kisses, high fives. We like to play some rock, paper, scissors. So we have a good time, and you know, the conservation and the science is all sprinkled in between, but it's all really fun. And I will say also, I have never had to dive so pretty in my life. A lot of my life was just doing research diving and just getting the job done, and now it's like you have to be perfect, which has just taken my diving to a whole other level. And that's me as a renegade. So. I also spend a lot of time not only diving, but also on the dry side, supporting my coworkers while they're diving. Whether I'm running the science communication from outside, I'm basically the diver's connection to the audience. So I can talk to them, I can talk to the audience, and I can be the middleman during those presentations. And then also, diving is a buddy sport. You always need a buddy to be safe, and when we do exhibit diving, we're sometimes alone, so your buddy is on the dry side and there in case of an emergency. In the top picture there on the left is us getting ready to do what we call an over the side dive, where we dive right underneath the aquarium pier. That could be for research, it could be for collection, it could be for practicing emergency protocols as well. And then at our field site, sometimes I'm just hanging out on the beach, getting ready to, take everyone's air levels when they get back out of the water. So now that you understand a little bit more about what we do at the Seattle Aquarium, I'm going to just quickly dive into the Ocean Pavilion building. So first off, why the Ocean Pavilion? Why, we have Pier 59 and 60 is all local. It's on an open system, it's all these local cold water critters, and now all of a sudden we have this entire tropical building. So a lot of people have been like, Why? Which is a fair question. And it's because we're expanding our conservation work to a global level. And it's also to highlight the similarities and the fact that we say it all the time at the aquarium that we have one big ocean. But this is what's called a spillhouse projection. And it's a different way of looking at the world map, with it being centered on the ocean. And you can really see that we don't have 5 oceans or 7 seas. It really is one big ocean. It's all connected. Our actions here are affecting things on the other side of the ocean, and vice versa. So the new Ocean Pavilion building is focused on the Coral Triangle, which is highlighted there on the map. And it includes the waters of places like Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippine Islands, Timor-Leste, and more. And then you can see where the Salish Sea is and where Seattle is there on the bottom. And there is an incredible amount of parallels, not only in the ecosystem services, or the services that these habitats provide to humans and other animals, but also in the issues that they're facing. There's a lot of parallels, and so now having this building, we can highlight all of that, and we can also work on things like reef shark, where we are impacting things across the Pacific Ocean. So coral reefs and kelp forests both provide habitat for critical animals, whether they're recreational or commercially fished. They act as a nursery for a lot of animals. They serve as natural buffers in storms. They dampen and slow down that wave action as it comes into our coastlines. And obviously they are providing food and nutrients for animals, including humans. So there are a lot of similarities, and our job in the new building is to talk about that and talk about the actions that we can take to protect these ecosystems around the world. So that brings me to the Ocean Pavilion. This is obviously a very early picture. This is, I think, literally the day that it was filled with water. This is the reef, which is the main habitat in the new building. It's over 500,000 gallons of water. It also has a lot of bioballs in it. And actually, during this picture, it only had bioballs in it. There were no fish in the house yet. But soon, there was at least me, so we have our Homo sapien, who was the first animal to enter the exhibit, doing some window cleaning and getting things ready for all of the animals. And then this is a picture that I took a couple of days ago. So now we have all of our fish friends that have joined us. We've got a couple of volunteer divers working in there. And this habitat is not only the biggest habitat at the aquarium, it also has 5 windows into it where you can peek into different microhabitats and see different animals. It has a public-facing window, so you never have to come into the aquarium, and you're still going to see sharks and rays swimming right over top of that along the waterfront. And it has over 30 different species. That number is still growing. We're going to be adding our black tip in shortly. Kuda's girlfriend, that's our Indo-Pacific leopard shark, his girlfriend is going to be coming soon. So we are still adding animals in here. We've done it at a slow pace. We've done it at their pace, what's good for them. We brought in the smallest animals first. My absolute favorites in here are the cleaner wrasse, small but mighty. And we let them establish, their territories and figure things out before we slowly added in the bigger animals. The eagle rays, which you can see the one I've added, the giant one I've added, but also there's one right at the top of the window that's swimming by in there. And they all went in one at a time to let them just kind of settle in and just, establish their territory. But this is where the biggest animals are. This is where the bowmouth guitarfish is that I talked about earlier. She is 6'2". Kuda, our Indo-Pacific leopard shark, is 6 foot. And our leopard whipray is 12 feet long. So there are a lot of really big animals in here, which is very fun and very humbling to work with them. We've also got the archipelago habitat, which is my favorite. Because it has live mangrove trees, and mangroves are pretty much as close as you get to kelp in the tropics. So I love to talk about my beloved kelp forests at this habitat, and you can see them right out the window. We get our seasonal bull kelp forest right off of the piers there. And again, there's all of these parallels between them protecting our coastlines, providing nursery habitat for all these really important species, nutrient cycling, oxygen production, like the list goes on of all these important ecosystem services that parallel between the two. And then again, a lot of the issues that they face, like eutrophication or too much of a good thing, too much nutrients coming into their system and throwing everything out of whack. So that is something that we talk a lot about at the archipelago. We've got our at home in the ocean space, which, going back to empathy, is a great space for kids and honestly all ages to really connect with these animals. There's little prompts above the habitats that kind of ask questions to inspire, again, that kind of perspective taking, like, are you a night owl too? And that's where the nocturnal animals are. Something like, are you a homebody? Do you want to go in or stay out? And that's where our honeycomb moray is, who's definitely a homebody. And our garden eels, one of my favorites, featured down there on the bottom. And also our very charismatic little peacock mantis shrimp, who has some incredible eyeballs that could be like a whole presentation in and of themselves, that are just chameleon eyes going every direction. And then of course we have our anemone throne, where kids can once again become the animal. They can become Nemo, become the clownfish, and crawl right into that anemone. So there's a lot of tactile, kind of learner-driven experiences in this space. There's also One Ocean Hall, which is a space that was designed along with our Indigenous consults, that was meant to be a community gathering space. So it's a really big space. There's some beautiful, sustainably sourced cedar benches along the other wall behind where the camera is. So that people can really gather around in this circular area, and then we can change the media. There's like 13 projectors. So we have a bunch of footage from Reshark, and all of a sudden you're in Raja Ampat in Indonesia, and you're seeing them release little baby sharks. You're seeing them doing the candling, holding the light behind the little shark egg and watching that little fetus developing in there. We can transport folks all around the world into the deep sea. We have one with deep sea vents, and this is a really great presentation space that we can talk about a lot of things that aren't even at the aquarium. And then finally, of course, diving. I'm going to talk more about diving. So diving in the Ocean Pavilion has been a blast. As much as I'm a cold water person, I do love the bowmouth guitarfish, and diving with all of the sharks and rays has been lovely. That perspective is from the top of the reef, from that main habitat. So as you're looking down right here, this is the oculus window that you can see from outside as you're walking along the waterfront. But it is just a massive swimming pool, and from those 5 windows into it, you really don't ever get to see how big it is. But again, it is over 500,000 gallons, and it's pretty incredible to dive in there. We haven't done any pumpkin carving or diving Santa over there, but I did get to do a spot for the NFL, for the Seahawks, which was very fun to do. And then, you know, on a daily basis, interpreting and dispelling a lot of the myths about sharks. One of the things people are often worried about are fish that are sitting on the bottom, which again, a lot of fish do that. Rockfish do that, wolfeels do that, those greenlings we met earlier do it, and so does Cuda. Cuda is the king of naps, our Indo-Pacific leopard shark. And that is something that a lot of people don't know about sharks, because we kind of tend to focus on great whites, who are obligate ram ventilators. That means they have to swim and have that water constantly pushing across their mouth and gills. But there are a lot of sharks, actually the majority of sharks, are buccal pumpers, which means they can sit there and just do that mouth pumping or buccal pumping and pump that water across their gills. So yeah, Cuda is perfectly fine. He's just taking a nap, so I thought I would just take a little nap with him. The other interesting thing about diving in this new building is that we have a lot of big animals that they're working with. It's a lot of personalities. And also they're really curious. And so the eagle rays love to come right up on the steps whenever we're getting in the water. So he did not get the memo that the pool was closed. And he's just coming right up there. And they come right past that area, which is where we get in the water. And so we have to wait until it clears. And sometimes we're like, he's gonna do a U-turn, we can feel it, he's gonna come back, and you don't ever wanna spook them. They are stingrays. And so, you know, we don't trim their stingers, you could, but it can be a stressful experience for them. If you've tried to trim the nails of a cat or dog, you know that that can be a stressful experience too. And so they're really not a threat. You just don't want to spook them. I don't want to step on them when I'm getting in the water. And speaking of curious fish, this is another one of my favorites who gets very excited when we get in the water. This is Tofu. She's a porcupine pufferfish. And she squirts water and gets really excited when we're coming in to hang out with her. Now, speaking of animals getting really excited, one of my favorite things in Ocean Pavilion is animal enrichment. And when people think of animal enrichment, I think most people think of sea otters, seals, birds, which is true. Enrichment is toys, if you're unfamiliar with it. Toys, ice treats, anything to make things fun. This is Mishka, the sea otter, who thinks that all of the enrichment is all for her and she's just gonna try to hold on to all of it. And she's the queen of enrichment, but there are other animals that also enjoy enrichment, like our sharks and rays. Like I said before, people don't give fish enough credit. Fish like to play with toys too. So this is one of our eagle rays playing with a football there. So this is one of my favorite things because again, it's just building empathy. People have so much fear around sharks and rays, and so seeing them like playing with toys, I think is just the simplest way to be like, there's nothing to fear here. Speaking of fish being smart, we also do a lot of training with our fish. And this is another thing that people think only happens with the mammals, which harbor seals are also great at training. But we work really hard to train our fish because it helps us to take better care of them. And it also helps to keep all of the fish safe and everyone coexisting together. So all of our sharks, rays, porcupine fish, and eels are all target trained. So target training is just where you hold out a shape or a symbol that is only theirs. It's like a name tag for them. And for instance, Kuda's is essentially a Pokeball or a half white, half red circle that we hold out for him. He knows that it's his. He comes right to it and puts his little snoot on it. And then we give him all his food and vitamins and any medicine that he might need. So it helps us to take better care of them. It makes them participants in their own healthcare. And also it means that when Tofu gets to hang out in her little laundry basket there, she gets to just eat all of her clams in peace. She doesn't have to worry about anyone stealing any of her food, so we can make sure that everyone's getting the diet that they need. And then also, we have our beautiful, this is our giant moray eel, who's also target trained to go up into that tube, which is really important for a couple reasons. One is that it's kind of like horse blinders, where like they can go for the food. It's not like another fish will go for their food and they might hurt that fish. So it keeps everyone safe there, but also for transport. When we're transporting these animals, this target training allows us to get a shark or a ray into a hammock, essentially, to transport them. Some of these fish are over 200 pounds, so it's a lot to move. Our bowmouth guitarfish, she's a big animal. And for the eels, it can be a little tricky. So if you get them into that tube, it not only keeps them safe during feeding, but we can get them to the vet clinic or wherever they might need to go as well. The last couple things that I quickly just wanted to touch on is not only is there a ton of research and conservation work and science communication going on at the aquarium, but we're also really doing our best to practice what we preach and using sustainable materials. Our goal is to operate 100% fossil fuel free. We have the outside of the building is forest certified yellow cedar from an indigenous company. We recirculate 96% of the salt water in the building. Basically, it's only what is lost to evaporation that we have to supplement back in. And then our whole heating system is warmed by the water in the building. So we have gone beyond what's called LEED certification to a whole other level, which is living building certification. And the really intense and important thing about it is it's not based on the plans, it's based on actuality. So it actually takes a full year of them monitoring that 12 months of what's actually happening to get that certification. So it's not just based on the plans, it's based on reality. And then the last thing that's really important about the design of the Ocean Pavilion is that it's shaped by Indigenous knowledge, and it was created with Indigenous consultants. And there is tons of art from local tribal members throughout the building. There's this beautiful seasonal round that you can interact with. There is beautiful glass art from Dan Friday, who is a local artist. There is on the roof, which is a public park, Valerie Seagrass, who's a traditional knowledge keeper for the Muckleshoot tribe, designed all of the plants that are in that space and also that art there in the middle. We have paddles that are carved from tribes around the world, which essentially represent an oath to the ocean and this kind of global pact to take care of it. And then on the top here, we have dry exhibits, that is what we call them, around the aquarium, and we call them hope objects as well, because they are pieces of either cultural significance or pieces of technology that are hopeful as far as the future of conservation. And a few of my favorites are this Sasi sign, which is on the top here, which our partners in Raja Ampat in Indonesia, it's their cultural practice to make a Sasi oath to the ocean, and you can kind of think of it in Western terms as like a marine protected area. But essentially it's like a no-take zone or a limited take zone, and they'll put out this Lokasi Sasi sign, and that is letting the community know that we are living in reciprocity with the ocean and working together and letting this area flourish. And then right next to it is a circle hook, which is an Indigenous design hook that it makes it so that you can return fish to the sea if you hook them. It's big enough that it's going to hook on their mouth, and so that means you're going to be able to return them rather than a gut hook. If we have any, again, I don't know how many people fish in this room, but if you are hooking them with a traditional hook shape, a lot of times it goes too deep in their mouth. It damages them, it exposes them to infection, and so even if you're tossing them back, they're probably not going to make it. And so this circle hook is so innovative, and again, it's something that's been used by Indigenous groups all over the world for a really long time. And it just hooks on their mouth, and then it's supporting sustainable fishing. And you know, if you catch a big female who regulations are saying get that back out there because the biggest, oldest fish are the most fecund and have the most reproductive output, well then you just hooked her on the mouth and it's no big deal and you can get her back in there. So all of those details is really what makes, I think, Ocean Pavilion a really special building. So the last thing that I will share is just if you feel inspired, if you feel like coming to visit us, that's incredible. But I would also urge you to sign up for ocean action alerts on the aquarium website. It's just occasional alerts that you can write a letter to your Congress representative. You can sign a petition. We have a whole policy team that is taking the research that we're doing and taking it to Olympia. And you know, right now they're working on a lot of things that have to do with plastics, a lot of orca recovery work as well. So it's just another way to make your voice heard. And that's all I've got. Thank you so much.
So we invite any of you if you have questions to come to one of the microphones. And if there are any questions in the Zoom chat, we'll also take those. Anybody have any questions?
I don't know if you'll know this one, but I was just in Salt Lake City for a conference, and the Natural History Museum there had an amazing exhibit on orcas. Do you know if that's traveling and anything about that particular exhibit?
I don't know anything about that particular exhibit. I know that there is a traveling orca exhibit that we had for a while, and that was at the Burke Museum. But I'm not sure if it's the same.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
I'm curious, is there any kind of involvement of the aquarium with, all the tires that were left around to basically encourage reef? Or hopefully encourage, I guess they're being taken out now.
Yeah, I know, there are, I think Port of Seattle is working on taking them out of Elliott Bay. We have done some work on, the particles from them that we get in our water samples, but we haven't done any like tire removals ourselves. We do remove trash from underneath the aquarium pier, which there is an incredible amount of trash along the waterfront as well. And then I know a lot of the issues with the tires is that they're shedding 6-ppd quinone, which is a compound that is important to the tire, but it can literally make salmon hearts stop. So there's been a lot of work on that by other groups, and so we're not doing any work because it's already being done. Yeah.
We have a question online. How many marine scientists like you are employed at the Seattle Aquarium?
I am more unique just because I'm in more of like a hybrid position where I work more between departments. But the research team, we're like small but mighty. The research team right now, I'm looking at Shane too. There's like 5 key volunteers for the research team at the aquarium. There are 4 research scientists, and then myself, who I'm like a hybrid position between research and education. And then we have 3 other divers on our education team that they don't assist with all of the research work. They assist with the field diving, but they don't do the lab work. So yeah, what is that, like maybe 10?
And then we have another one. What is the best way individuals can get involved with ocean conservation locally?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that you can get involved. I think signing up for the Ocean Action Alerts is a really good way. I think it depends on the level of involvement that you want, but we have a huge team of volunteers. And we have volunteers in the lab, we take volunteers into the field as well. And so that's a really great way to get involved. Yeah, and I think also, I think also just come to the aquarium and talk to us more, I would say. Like there's a lot of ways to help out, but I think the Ocean Action Alerts is a really great way to get started.
I have a follow-up question. Will the big fish eat the small ones in the habitat? And
Yeah.
how do you prevent that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of it is organizing them by size. Fish can't chew their food, so as long as they're all roughly about the same size, everybody is safe, everybody's chill, nobody's picking on their neighbors. And then also, the sharks and rays that we have are really more interested in mollusks, so like clams, and then also crustaceans. So they're not super interested in the fish, which is another kind of misconception about sharks, is that sharks are these like apex predators. A lot of sharks are really more like the raccoons. They're like the scavengers, and they're eating, lobster, crab, shrimp, and clam. And then also the target training, right? So having them know who they're going to get their food. At the end of the day, they are wild animals. It does happen. It doesn't happen very often. I've only seen it like 3 times in the 8 years that I've been diving there, so yeah. Yeah.
I was curious about the survival rate of the turtles that are collected, once you get them.
Yeah, the ones that I have been there for, I would say it's like maybe a 50% survival rate. So sometimes like they're in a bad way when they come to us, and we don't know how long that they've been stuck in that cold water current. But yeah, it's enough that obviously it's worth it. Like a lot of them in the past, decade, we've had over a dozen of them come through our doors. We have had several success stories where we get to watch their little trackers go back down to Mexico, but yeah, I would say it's probably about a 50-50.
So where is the off-site animal care center?
Yeah, so it is a secret. It is an undisclosed location, just because again, I think also like aquariums, people love animals, right? And we love animals too. And we're all on the same side, but I think a lot of people don't understand the nuance and the gray areas, and they just get upset about animals that are under human care. And so there are like protesting groups, and we don't, for the safety of the animals, we don't want them to know where that facility is. But it is nearby, somewhere between the airport and the aquarium. But yeah.
Any other questions? One more.
I'm concerned about funding issues for the future. And just wondered, I don't know if you can speak on that, but I just wondered, how Seattle Aquarium is anticipating the future and just commenting generally on things that may be losing funding in the near future.
Yeah, so I will say most of our funding comes from ticket sales. That is a huge part of our funding. Like, yes, we have grants, and yes, we have donors, and that's also a lot of, we are a nonprofit. But the majority of our funding does come from our ticket sales. So by coming to the aquarium, like, that's a huge support. Yeah, with the current climate and state of things, yeah, grants are tricky. A lot of our research work, of course, is funded by grants as well. And we do have a lot of donors that help us. But with the new building, definitely the budget is very tight at the aquarium right now. We did have layoffs recently, so if you saw that article in the Seattle Times, yeah, it's not a great time for funding these projects. There are still things that are happening at the aquarium, but it's definitely like it's not at the capacity that we would like it to be at. So yeah.
And I also just add real quickly to that, if you work for an institution and want to have an event at the aquarium, it's really fantastic at that Ocean Pavilion, and the food is delicious. And we went vegetarian for Northwest Science Riders, and it was a fantastic event. So that's another way to support the aquarium.
Yeah, totally. We do weddings, proms, bar mitzvahs.